Stop right there. The janitor's voice echoed through the packed federal courtroom. CEO Richard Montgomery watched in horror as his $50 million lawyer gathered his briefcase and walked straight out the door, abandoning him mid-trial. But what happened next would shock everyone in that courtroom, including the judge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of October 15th started like any other high-stakes corporate trial at the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. Outside the imposing granite courthouse on Pearl Street, news vans lined the sidewalk 3 deep, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like metallic flowers seeking sun. Reporters clutched steaming coffee cups in the crisp autumn air, their breath visible as they delivered live updates to morning shows across the nation. Inside courtroom 15A, the atmosphere crackled with tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Industries, sat at the defendant's table in his perfectly tailored charcoal Armani suit, his silver cufflinks catching the fluorescent light. His company, a pharmaceutical giant worth $12 billion, faced federal charges of price manipulation and insider trading that could result in criminal penalties and the complete dismantling of his empire. Across the aisle, the prosecution team looked like hungry wolves circling wounded prey. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen had spent 2 years building this case, and today marked the culmination of her career-defining moment. Her evidence was overwhelming. Internal emails, recorded phone calls, financial records that painted a clear picture of systematic fraud spanning nearly a decade. But Richard Montgomery had one ace up his sleeve: Jonathan Blackwood, the most expensive defense attorney money could buy. Blackwood commanded fees of $2,000 per hour and had never lost a federal case in his 23-year career. His reputation was legendary. The man who could make juries forget DNA evidence, who could convince judges that black was white if the price was right. As Judge Williams called the court to order, Montgomery felt a surge of confidence. Blackwood had promised him complete vindication, assuring him that the prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence and legal technicalities that he could easily dismantle. The retainer alone had cost Montgomery $5 million, but freedom was priceless. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Williams announced, "you may proceed with your opening statement." Jonathan Blackwood rose from his chair with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to commanding attention. His navy Brioni suit was immaculate, his silver hair perfectly styled, his Italian leather shoes polished to mirror brightness. He approached the jury box with the confidence of a matador entering the ring. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jonathan Blackwood began, his voice rich and melodious, "you are about to witness a government witch hunt of unprecedented proportions. My client, Richard Montgomery, stands before you as a successful businessman whose only crime was building the American dream from nothing." Montgomery nodded approvingly. This was exactly the narrative they had crafted during months of preparation. Paint him as the underdog, the self-made entrepreneur being torn down by jealous bureaucrats and ambitious prosecutors seeking headlines. But something was wrong. Blackwood's usual commanding presence seemed forced today. His hands, normally steady as a surgeon's, trembled slightly as he gestured toward the prosecution table. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the courtroom's cool temperature. "The prosecution will try to convince you that Mr. Montgomery orchestrated an elaborate scheme to defraud investors and manipulate drug prices," Blackwood continued, but his voice lacked his usual conviction. "However, the evidence will show that—" He stopped mid-sentence, his face suddenly pale. From the gallery behind the defense table came a barely audible gasp. Montgomery turned to see a man in an expensive gray suit whispering urgently into his phone. The man's face was familiar: Thomas Harrison, one of Blackwood's junior partners. Harrison ended his call and approached the defense table with purposeful strides. He leaned down to whisper something in Blackwood's ear. Whatever he said caused the color to drain completely from the legendary attorney's face. "Your Honor," Blackwood said, his voice now shaky, "I need to request a brief recess." Judge Williams frowned. "Mr. Blackwood, you're in the middle of your opening statement. This is highly irregular." "I understand, Your Honor, but there's been an urgent development that requires immediate attention." The judge's expression hardened. She had presided over enough trials to recognize when something was seriously amiss. "Very well, we'll take a 15-minute recess." As the jury filed out, Montgomery grabbed Blackwood's arm. "What the hell is going on, Jonathan?" Blackwood's famous composure had completely cracked. His hands shook as he loosened his silk tie. "Richard, we have a problem. A big problem." Harrison leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "The FBI just raided our offices. They have a warrant for all files related to the Montgomery case. Someone tipped them off about the witness coaching and the suppressed evidence." Montgomery felt his world tilting. "What suppressed evidence? You told me we were clean." Blackwood's eyes darted around the courtroom like a trapped animal seeking escape. "There may have been certain documents that we chose not to disclose during discovery. Internal memos that could be misinterpreted." "Misinterpreted?" Montgomery's voice rose dangerously. "You mean there's evidence that could convict me that you've been hiding from the prosecution?" The weight of realization crashed down on Montgomery like an avalanche. His lawyer, the man he had trusted with his freedom, his fortune, his very life, had been playing a dangerous game of legal roulette. Worse, they had been caught. When court reconvened, Blackwood stood before Judge Williams like a man facing his own execution. "Your Honor, due to circumstances beyond my control, I must withdraw from this case effective immediately."
The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Judge Williams banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! Order in my courtroom!" She fixed Blackwood with a withering stare. "Mr. Blackwood, this is completely unprecedented. You cannot simply abandon your client in the middle of a trial." "Your Honor, ethical considerations prevent me from continuing representation. I have no choice but to withdraw." Montgomery shot to his feet, his face flushed with rage and panic. "You can't do this to me, Jonathan! We have a contract!" But Blackwood was already gathering his briefcase, his movements sharp and desperate. "I'm sorry, Richard. You'll need to find new counsel." "The trial starts in 30 minutes. How am I supposed to find a lawyer in 30 minutes?" Blackwood paused at the courtroom door, turning back one final time. "I suggest you contact the public defender's office. They might be able to assign someone." With that, he was gone, leaving Montgomery standing alone at the defense table like a ship captain abandoned during a storm. Judge Williams surveyed the chaos with practiced calm. "Mr. Montgomery, you have two options. We can postpone this trial for 60 days to allow you to secure new representation, or you can proceed pro se, representing yourself." Montgomery's mind raced. A 60-day delay would give the prosecution more time to build their case, and news of Blackwood's dramatic exit would be splashed across every financial publication in the world. His stock price would crater, investors would flee, and his company might not survive the negative publicity. But representing himself against a seasoned federal prosecutor? That was professional suicide. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I need a moment to consider my options." As Montgomery stood there, abandoned and desperate, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Near the back of the courtroom, barely visible in the shadows cast by the tall windows, stood a man in a gray maintenance uniform. The janitor was holding a mop and bucket, ostensibly cleaning, but his eyes were fixed intently on the proceedings. Their gazes met for just a moment. The janitor was African-American, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. There was something about his expression, a look of deep understanding, as if he comprehended the legal proceedings better than most of the spectators in their expensive suits. Montgomery quickly looked away, his mind returning to his impossible situation. He was about to face the most important trial of his life, with no legal representation, no preparation, and no hope. What he didn't know was that the man with the mop had been listening to every word, understanding every legal nuance, and recognizing every prosecutorial strategy. And what Montgomery definitely didn't know was that this overlooked janitor was about to change everything. The clock on the courtroom wall ticked toward 10:30 a.m. In just minutes, the trial would resume, and Richard Montgomery would have to make the most consequential decision of his life. Behind him, the janitor quietly continued his work, invisible to everyone, but seeing everything. The stage was set for one of the most remarkable courtroom dramas in legal history.
Then came the case that changed everything. Defending Patricia Williams, no relation to the current judge, a single mother who had been fired from her job at an auto parts factory for refusing to falsify safety inspection reports. The evidence was clear. Marcus had built an airtight case, and justice seemed certain. But justice had a price that Marcus couldn't pay. The factory's corporate lawyers offered him a briefcase containing $200,000 in cash to throw the case. When he refused, they destroyed his career with surgical precision. False ethics complaints were filed, forged documents appeared suggesting client fund misappropriation, and witnesses mysteriously changed their testimonies. Within 6 months, Marcus Washington lost his law license, his practice, his reputation, and his faith in the legal system. The State Bar Association stripped him of his credentials based on fabricated evidence, and no amount of appeals could restore what had been stolen from him. He left Detroit with nothing but his knowledge and a burning desire to someday witness real justice prevail over corruption. New York offered anonymity and a chance to start over, even if it meant trading his suit and briefcase for a mop and bucket. Now, 7 years later, Marcus had become the courthouse's most invisible fixture. Judges greeted him politely, but never really saw him. Lawyers stepped around him without acknowledgement. Security guards nodded absently as he badged in each evening. He had become a ghost haunting the halls of justice, observing everything while remaining unseen. But Marcus had been watching, learning, studying every case, every argument, every legal strategy that passed through those halls. He knew Sarah Jen's prosecution style better than her own assistants did. He had observed her win rate, her preferred jury arguments, her tendency to over-rely on circumstantial evidence when she lacked a smoking gun. More importantly, Marcus had been cleaning Montgomery's defense team offices for the past 8 months. He had seen the real evidence, not just what was presented in court, but what was hidden in Blackwood's private files. Internal Montgomery Industries emails that proved Richard Montgomery had been deliberately kept in the dark about the price manipulation scheme. Board meeting minutes showing Montgomery had actually opposed the very strategies his company was now accused of implementing. Jonathan Blackwood had built his defense on the wrong foundation. Instead of presenting Montgomery as an innocent CEO betrayed by corrupt subordinates, which the evidence actually supported, Blackwood had chosen to deny everything and attack the prosecution's credibility. It was a strategy that protected the real culprits while sacrificing his client. As Marcus watched Montgomery stand alone at the defense table, frantically shuffling through legal documents he barely understood, a familiar fire ignited in his chest. This was exactly the kind of injustice he had witnessed in Detroit, a powerful system crushing an individual who didn't deserve it. "Your Honor," Montgomery said, his voice growing stronger,
I'm ready to present my opening statement. Judge Williams looked skeptical, but nodded. Proceed, Mr. Montgomery. Keep in mind that you'll be held to the same standards as any licensed attorney. Montgomery approached the jury box with none of Blackwood's polished confidence. His hands shook slightly as he opened his notebook, and several papers fluttered to the floor. As he bent to retrieve them, nervous laughter rippled through the gallery. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Montgomery began, "I know what you're thinking. Here's a CEO who just watched his expensive lawyer run away, and now he expects you to believe he's innocent." It wasn't the opening Marcus would have chosen, but at least it was honest. Montgomery was acknowledging the elephant in the room rather than pretending it didn't exist. "The truth is, I don't know why Mr. Blackwood left. I don't know what the FBI found in his offices, but I know what I didn't do, and I know what my company actually did." From his position near the back wall, Marcus could see Sarah Jen taking notes, already identifying weaknesses in Montgomery's amateur approach. She would eat him alive during cross-examination unless someone helped level the playing field. Montgomery spent the next 20 minutes delivering a rambling, disorganized opening that touched on his company's charitable giving, his personal work ethic, and his commitment to affordable health care. It was heartfelt, but legally ineffective. He failed to address the specific charges, presented no coherent defense theory, and gave the prosecution multiple angles of attack. When Montgomery finished and returned to his seat, he looked defeated before the trial had truly begun. The jury's expressions ranged from sympathetic to skeptical, but none looked convinced of his innocence. "Ms. Chen," Judge Williams announced, "you may call your first witness." "Thank you, Your Honor. The government calls Dr. Jennifer Martinez to the stand." Marcus recognized the name immediately. Dr. Martinez was Montgomery Industries' former head of pricing strategy, one of the executives who had actually orchestrated the price manipulation scheme. According to the documents Marcus had seen in Blackwood's files, she had received immunity in exchange for her testimony against Montgomery. As Dr. Martinez was sworn in, Marcus moved his cleaning cart closer to the defense table. Montgomery was frantically flipping through legal pads, clearly unprepared for cross-examination. He had no idea that the woman about to testify against him had been offered a deal that would save her from prosecution in exchange for painting him as the mastermind of a scheme he had actually opposed. Sarah Jen approached the witness stand with predatory confidence. "Dr. Martinez, please tell the jury about your former position at Montgomery Industries." "I was the Senior Vice President of Pricing Strategy for the Pharmaceutical Division," Martinez replied, her voice steady and rehearsed. "And in that capacity, did you have direct contact with CEO Richard Montgomery regarding pricing decisions?" "Yes, I reported to him weekly on all major pricing initiatives."
Marcus knew this was a lie. The emails he had seen showed that Martinez rarely communicated with Montgomery directly, instead reporting to the chief operating officer, who then filtered information up to the CEO level. But Montgomery had no way to prove this without access to the documents his own lawyer had been hiding. As the questioning continued, Marcus watched Montgomery's face grow increasingly pale. Each answer painted him as more deeply involved in decisions he had never actually made. The prosecution's case was building momentum like a runaway train, and Montgomery had no idea how to stop it. The afternoon session would bring more devastating testimony, and Montgomery's amateur cross-examinations would only make things worse. Without help, he would be convicted of crimes he didn't commit, while the real perpetrators walked free under immunity deals. Marcus gripped his mop handle tighter, memories of Detroit flooding back. Once again, he was watching justice being perverted by those with power and resources. Once again, an innocent person was being sacrificed to protect the guilty. But this time, Marcus Washington was in a position to do something about it. The only question was whether he had the courage to step out of the shadows and risk everything one more time. 3 days into the trial, Richard Montgomery looked like a man drowning in quicksand. His usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated. His tie hung crooked, his shirt was wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The prosecution had systematically demolished his amateur attempts at defense, and the jury's sympathetic looks had transformed into expressions of certainty about his guilt. Sarah Chen had just finished presenting her star witness, former CFO Robert Sterling, who testified under immunity that Montgomery had personally approved every fraudulent pricing scheme. It was devastating testimony, and Montgomery's cross-examination had been a disaster. He had stumbled through basic legal procedures, failed to challenge obvious inconsistencies, and actually helped strengthen the prosecution's case through his inexperience. "Your Honor," Chen announced with barely concealed satisfaction, "the government rests." Judge Williams turned to Montgomery, who sat alone at the defense table, surrounded by towers of disorganized documents. "Mr. Montgomery, you may now present your defense." Montgomery stood slowly, his hands visibly trembling. "Your Honor, I call myself to the stand." It was exactly the wrong move. Marcus Washington, who had been observing from his usual position near the back wall, knew that putting Montgomery on the stand would be suicide. Without proper preparation and legal guidance, Montgomery would be eviscerated during cross-examination. But Marcus had seen enough. For 3 days, he had watched justice being perverted while he remained silent in the shadows. The real evidence that could save Montgomery sat in boxes in the courthouse storage room, documents that Blackwood had suppressed because they implicated his other clients who were co-conspirators in the scheme. As Montgomery approached the witness stand, Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Stop right there!" The words exploded from Marcus's throat with such authority that the entire courtroom froze. Every head turned toward the back of the room where the janitor stood, no longer invisible, no longer silent. Judge Williams banged her gavel in confusion. "Excuse me, sir, you cannot interrupt these proceedings." But Marcus was already moving, pushing his cleaning cart aside and walking down the center aisle with purposeful strides. The confidence in his movement, the legal precision in his bearing, transformed him before everyone's eyes from a humble janitor into something else entirely. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice carrying the unmistakable cadence of someone trained in courtroom procedure, "I respectfully request permission to address the court on a matter of critical importance to these proceedings." Security guards moved toward him, but Judge Williams raised her hand, stopping them. Something in Marcus's demeanor, the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, commanded attention. "Who are you?" she demanded. "My name is Marcus Washington, Your Honor. I'm the night janitor for this courthouse, but I'm also a disbarred attorney from the state of Michigan, and I have evidence that will prove Mr. Montgomery's innocence." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Sarah Chen shot to her feet. "Your Honor, this is completely irregular. This man has no standing in this court." But Judge Williams was studying Marcus with intense curiosity. "Mr. Washington, you claim to have evidence? What kind of evidence?" Marcus reached into his uniform pocket and produced a key ring. "Your Honor, for the past 7 years, I've had access to every part of this courthouse, including the storage rooms where seized evidence is kept. 3 months ago, I discovered boxes of documents that were supposed to be turned over during discovery, but were never provided to the prosecution." Montgomery's eyes widened. "What documents?"
Marcus turned to face him. Internal emails from your company showing you repeatedly questioned and opposed the pricing strategies that you're now accused of approving. Board meeting transcripts where you demanded transparency in pricing decisions. Financial reports that you requested which expose the very fraud you're accused of orchestrating. Sarah Chen's face had gone pale. Your Honor, even if such documents exist, they cannot be admitted. This man has no legal authority to— Actually, Marcus interrupted, his legal training evident in every word. Under Rule 16 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, newly discovered evidence that could materially affect the outcome of a trial must be disclosed regardless of the source. Furthermore, the Brady Doctrine requires the prosecution to turn over all exculpatory evidence, even if it's discovered mid-trial. Judge Williams stared at him in amazement. Mr. Washington, for a janitor, you seem remarkably well-versed in federal criminal procedure. Knowledge doesn't disappear when you lose your license, Your Honor. It just gets overlooked.
Marcus walked to the fence table and addressed Montgomery directly. Mr. Montgomery, your lawyer Jonathan Blackwood knew about these documents. He chose not to use them because they would have implicated his other clients, board members who are also facing charges in related cases. He sacrificed your defense to protect his more lucrative accounts. Montgomery's voice was barely a whisper. You mean I've been set up? Yes, sir. You were the fall guy for a conspiracy that you actually tried to stop. Marcus turned back to Judge Williams. Your Honor, I understand that I have no official standing in this court, but I am requesting permission to act as Mr. Montgomery's counsel for the remainder of this trial. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Judge Williams looked from Marcus to Montgomery to the prosecution table, clearly wrestling with a situation unlike any in her 20 years on the bench. Mr. Washington, she said finally, you're disbarred. You cannot practice law. In Michigan, Your Honor, but I was never disbarred in New York. And while I never applied for admission to the New York bar, federal court rules allow for temporary admission of out-of-state attorneys in specific circumstances. Sarah Chen was frantically whispering with her assistants, clearly trying to find a legal objection that would stick. Judge Williams made her decision. Mr. Montgomery, do you wish to accept Mr. Washington as your counsel? Montgomery looked at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time. He saw not a janitor, but a man whose eyes burned with intelligence and determination. A man who had just offered him something no amount of money could buy. Hope. Yes, Your Honor, I do. Very well. Mr. Washington, I'm granting you temporary permission to practice in this court for the remainder of this trial only. But I want to see those documents you mentioned, and I want to see them now. What followed was the most remarkable transformation any courtroom had ever witnessed. Marcus Washington shed his janitor's uniform like a snake shedding old skin, revealing the brilliant legal mind that had been hidden underneath. With Montgomery Industries' corporate credit card, he purchased a suit from the courthouse district's legal clothing store during a brief recess, transforming his appearance to match his expertise. The suppressed documents told a story that vindicated Montgomery completely. Email after email showed him questioning suspicious pricing decisions, demanding explanations for profit margins that seemed too high, and ultimately threatening to fire executives who couldn't justify their strategies. The real conspiracy had been orchestrated by his CFO, his head of pricing, and 3 board members, all of whom had received immunity deals in exchange for testifying against Montgomery. Marcus's cross-examination of the prosecution's witnesses was a masterclass in legal precision. He systematically destroyed their credibility, revealed their immunity agreements, and exposed the lies they had told to save themselves. When he cross-examined Dr. Martinez, he produced an email she had written calling Montgomery an ethical obstacle to profitability. Hardly the words of someone describing her co-conspirator. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of not guilty on all charges. As the courtroom erupted in celebration, Montgomery embraced Marcus with tears in his eyes. "How can I ever repay you?" Marcus smiled. "Help me get my law license back. I think it's time for me to stop cleaning up other people's messes and start practicing law again." 6 months later, Marcus Washington Esquire sat in his new office on the 30th floor of Montgomery Tower. The brass nameplate on his door read, General Counsel, Montgomery Industries, but his real title was much simpler. He was the man who proved that justice sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Richard Montgomery had used his influence and resources to help Marcus navigate the complex process of license reinstatement in New York. The Michigan Bar Association, faced with overwhelming evidence of the corruption that had destroyed Marcus's career, not only reinstated his license, but issued a formal apology. The janitor's uniform now hung framed on Marcus's office wall, not as a reminder of shame, but as a symbol of how far he had traveled and how much he had learned while invisible to the world. Sometimes, Marcus reflected, as he watched the sunset over Manhattan, the most powerful position in any room is the one where nobody expects you to have power at all. He had spent 7 years invisible, learning, watching, and waiting for the moment when justice needed him most. And when that moment came, he was ready. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.